it's one of the most scandalous stories I've seen in a very long time coming out of Britain. And that's saying something, because we see something like this happen pretty much every week. I think the key point here, and let's be clear about what happened. Again, we're talking about allegedly because this is still going on in trial, so we have to be careful with that with the British legal system. But you had this young 18-year-old kid get stabbed in the legs and in the lungs. Mm-hmm. And let's just read the quote there. Put simply, Henry drowned in his own blood, with his lung having been cut by the knife going 8 centimetres into him. The police essentially let him drown in his own blood after they arrested him because the attacker, alleged attacker, said that he had been racially abused. So the police, they did try and give him some medicine and try and help revive him, but it was too late. So the guy is there laying out, drowning in his own blood whilst he's been arrested because the guy said he'd been racist against him. Mm. I mean, what does that say about the police today? This is the anti-racist ideology at its worst. This is literally someone dying because the police are afraid of, not taking so-called racist allegations seriously enough. This has been going on in the Met Police and the police all across Britain for decades, going back to the case of Stephen Lawrence, who was murdered in the 1990s, our sort of original George Floyd. And later we've had other incidents which also caused riots, the murder of Mark Duggan and others. And the police have become so anti-racist in their ideology that they would happily, apparently, let an 18-year-old boy drown on his own blood, then save his life, and they believe the attacker, or the alleged attacker who accused him of being racist. It's disgusting. Well, there's so many young men who have suffered as a result of our migration policies, and this is just the latest victim of this. This is obviously the police didn't step in here, but this also goes, the blame also has to go on our politicians who open the borders to millions of people from around the world. There was another case of a guy called Thomas Roberts, a young 21-year-old Royal Marine, who was stabbed in the heart by an illegal migrant a few years ago. That illegal migrant had smuggled himself into Britain in 2018 on the back of a lorry, and he claimed that he was 14. He was actually 19. They sent him to a school in Devon with 14-year-olds in which he was carrying knives and being aggressive. He gets excluded from the school, suspended from the school. He then is in with a foster home with a foster mother, again, carrying knives, being aggressive. The police do nothing. The foster mother is worried about her life. It turned out that this guy had already been arrested, or was being hunted by Interpol, the European sort of FBI, for murdering 2 people in Serbia. So if the Home Office in Britain had done all of their checks beforehand and had actually vetted this guy properly and not put him in a school with school children, even though he'd already murdered 2 people, Thomas Roberts would still be alive today. And 2 days, I think, before Thomas Roberts was actually murdered by this guy, the police had a complaint that he was carrying around knives or a machete in a town. The police went after him. They went to his house. They couldn't get into his house, so they just gave up. I think a day later, or just hours later, he went and stabbed Thomas Roberts in the heart because of a dispute over one of those e-scooters, again, after a night out. Just to bring it back to Britain for a second, because there's actually 3 examples I can think of where anti-racism has led to terrible, terrible consequences. So, the grooming gangs are a great example of this, where the police and the local councils and authorities refused to investigate many of these cases because they were worried about being accused of racism. And that allowed for the systematic rape or systemic rape of thousands, if not tens of thousands, even more than that, white young girls in Britain over since the 1970s. Another case more recently, the Manchester Arena bombing, where an Ariana Grande concert in Manchester, this Islamic terrorist blew up all these children, dozens of young girls were slaughtered. One of the security guards noticed the attacker and thought he looked suspicious, but he said to an inquiry later that he didn't intervene because, again, he was worried about being accused of racism. And the third one, and this is even more recent, this was in Nottingham. A black guy went and stabbed 2 19-year-olds and a caretaker, I think he was in his 60s, all of whom died or were murdered by him. He could have been sectioned by the National Health Service. They wanted to section him years before, but the National Health Service chose not to section him because apparently they believed they'd been sectioning too many black people and they didn't want to be seen as racist. So this is the outcome of anti-racist ideology, leads to death, leads to murder, leads to rape. It's terrible. And I know you've written a lot about this in your book.
What's sectioning?
Sectioning is when someone is mentally unwell, they take you in and they basically lock you up in a hospital, in a mental hospital, and treat you. So this guy was basically mental or mentally unwell, and doctors referred him to the NHS to be sectioned, to be locked up under supervision, and they didn't do that because they were worried about being.
Why do you think England's getting hit? Okay, the reason I ask this, England's getting hit so hard by this, is it because of the deep centralization of authority? So it makes it so that the king is like Parliament is basically the Governor General's serves at the leisure of the king, can be removed, and then they can disband Parliament if the king instructs them to. And then is the king like a puppet of the World Economic Forum that's trying to create the New World Order? I don't know, not that you know exactly, but what's your take on it?
Well, the king doesn't really have any role. I mean, it's a ceremonial role, essentially, so he can't really do anything politically. You do have a very centralized political system, though, because Parliament is sovereign. We don't have three branches of government like you do here in the United States. We don't have these sort of so-called checks and balances. So when a government comes in with a majority in Parliament, they can pass any law they like and do whatever they want. So when you have all these instances, which Scott was referring to, where the British people vote in and elect these parliaments that are promising to reduce migration, they can just do the exact opposite. There's nothing to stop them from doing that. And that's exactly what happened, where you had these conservative governments who kept promising their voters that we're going to reduce migration. They would do the exact opposite, and they could use legislation in Parliament to do that.
Are they importing because they need the labor? They need the work?
It's a complex situation. So yes, businesses want cheap labor. There's also this sort of diversity creed. We're stronger if we're diverse, which obviously isn't true. And a lot of these people, again, it's a worry of being accused of racism. Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister who let in more migrants than any other Prime Minister in recent years, 4 million people from the third world in a 3-year period, 2021 to 2024. I interviewed his former chief advisor who was there when they were in Downing Street, and he told me that Boris was afraid of losing his friends in the liberal media, and again, because he's scared of being accused of racism, and that was one of the reasons that he opened the border. It was just appeasing these people in North London who are very liberal. The elite in Britain believes in multiculturalism as a doctrine. They want cheaper labour, absolutely. And for the left, doesn't apply to the right, but for the left, it's a political motivation as well, where, same thing here in the States. You import people who will support you politically, eventually in elections. And I think that's slightly backfired. There's some irony in that with the Muslims that have come into Britain at the moment, because they're not supporting the Labour Party. They're either supporting the Green Party, which is a radical left-wing party, which has been around for decades, but it's become a kind of essentially Islamist party now, or they're supporting Islamist members of parliament or Islamist candidates specifically. So now you've got this weird splintering of British politics where it's no longer Labour or Conservative, our equivalent of Republicans and Democrats. It's now the Islamist parties, the Green Party, the Reform Party led by Nigel Farage, lots of nationalist parties in Scotland and England and Wales. So you're seeing a complete splintering because of the demographics have just totally transformed in the last 30, 50 years.
Is racism illegal in Britain? Because here you can be as racist as you want. It's legal as long as you say.
Essentially, it is illegal because they have these laws against being what they call grossly offensive or racial hatred. And if you tweet something that they think that a judge decides is grossly offensive, you can be sent to prison. If you tweet something that is racially stirs racial hatred, you can be sent to prison, and that has happened. Like I said, the case of Lucy Connolly was a famous one.
Do you think this story is going to instigate? I mean, because we had the Southport, stabbings. This was another high-profile stabbing. A migrant, obviously was the perpetrator, and it led to riots.
Yeah.
Obviously, the atmosphere is a bit different now because, again, with reform, a lot of people have speculated that will sort of tamp down on civil unrest because, again, reform can kind of be used as a siphon to siphon off the anger. Do you think that's a reality? Do you think this sort of stabbing will be high-profile enough, galvanizing enough to spur on some of that, again, social unrest?
I don't know if we're going to see riots. I mean, that case in Southport was very specific, where you had girls who are 6, 7, 8 years old going to a Taylor Swift dance class, getting stabbed hundreds of times by this offender. Again, this is another case where anti-racism came in, where I think the head teacher, they did an inquiry into this case where this boy who was born of Rwandan parents, loads and loads of warnings. He was referred to the anti-terrorism program we have in the UK called Prevent beforehand. No action was taken. Again, found with knives on a bus. The police took essentially no action. And one of his teachers, I think the head teacher, raised concerns about the fact that he'd been carrying knives and was aggressive, and was told, we cannot look like we're accusing a black boy of having a knife. Essentially, we can't be looking like we're racist here. And this led, without intervening in this case, this led to him going and murdering little children, little girls. This is why people were rioting. I mean, in this case, obviously it's terrible. But I think in that case, it was so emotionally driven. I could completely understand why people were so angry at that time.
Because people point out, like in Ireland, it seems like Ireland is where you see the most rioting, the most, like you see people take matters in their own hands, like burn down migrant hotels and that sort of thing. And some people have pointed out, well, the primary reason why that's happening is because there is no release valve for a lot of that frustration, because Ireland doesn't have a right-wing party. There's not really a right-wing movement to be said at all, really, in Ireland. And so a lot of those people that, again, have they're furious with the situation in their country, there is no release valve. Like they have to, if they feel backed into a corner, they have to conduct themselves in this matter. Where, again, with the rise of reform in England, that could maybe function a bit more as a release valve.
Well, the Southport riots happened just after Labour won that general election. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a good point. I mean, maybe people felt at that time sort of disenfranchised and they couldn't do anything about it. We're stuck with Labour for the next 5 years. And as you say, we've just had these local elections in Britain where Reform did very well. There's going to be a by-election soon that's coming up where hopefully I think the Reform Party are hoping to win that election too. So it looks like there is a potential alternative. As you say, in Ireland, there is no alternative. Yeah. There's just grassroots campaigners. In the Irish Parliament, there's 2 or 3 sort of independent people who are anti-migration. So I don't want the UK to go down this road of political violence. I don't want to see that. I think we will see that increasingly if governments continue to promise one thing on migration and do another. And if we continue to see these terrible cases where anti-racism and DEI leads to the murder of white English people.
How do you guys